Welcome to the Religious Treehouse. I'm Jody.
And I'm Matthew.
How are you doing today, Matthew?
I'm doing really good. My favorite band just released a new song, so I'm listening to that. It's a good day. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Sabrina Carpenter released a new song like a few days ago. It's really good.
Oh,
It's called Man
wow.
Child.
Look at
What's it?
us listening to music.
What's the 21 Pilot song called?
I don't know. It came out like 3 hours ago. I don't remember these things. I just know it
Well,
sounded good.
don't know the song title. No, it sounded great.
Listen, I'll
Hey,
learn. I'll learn it at some point.
that's all good. What are we talking about today, Matthew?
We are talking. It's our movie week. We're talking about movies this week, and we're talking about Monty Python's Life of Brian. Which this one was my choice. I chose this one because it's one of the silliest movies I know. And I haven't seen it in a while, and I forgot how problematic it was, but I still think it's great despite the various areas of problems.
Yeah, I got no disclaimers, and I believe for Journey to Bethlehem, I told you you might hate this.
Right. I don't think you would hate this though.
No, but I think, but you also didn't remember, I think, everything that happens in the movie.
Right. There's like scenes that like stand out in my mind of like, oh, this is hilarious. This is fantastic. This is so good. And then there's other scenes where I'm like, oh, I forgot they had blackface. Whoops. Um, so no, there's definitely, and I think that's like part of what Monty Python is. Like they're known for their short skits, and that is essentially what this movie is. It's a whole bunch of short, interconnected skits that are all put together. Because there's not like one, like it follows a plot, like for sure, but each plot is separated into very distinct little sections, which I think is how Monty Python writes their stuff, which is why it's so enjoyable. I love a good British humor. Um, but there's a lot going on here.
Oh yeah, and it's not that I thought it, that you thought I would hate it or anything. It was just shocking to me. And then Connor had to remind me it's in the same category as things like Spaceballs or
Yeah,
Robin Hood Men in Tights or Super Troopers.
sure.
Um, Super Troopers is only kind of similar because they're also a ensemble cast that comes back together for multiple projects.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I don't know Super Troopers, but the Mel Brooks films, like this does feel like a Mel Brooks movie in that sense. Um, except when Mel Brooks handles, Jewish jokes, he does it much better than how Monty Python handles it. So love Mel Brooks. Monty Python's great too.
it's satire, right? Like it's
Oh, this is
considered
100% satire. This is
okay.
all huge satire, which is why I'm like not fuming at like the anti-Semitic jokes happening because it's not. It's almost so extreme that it isn't, as problematic as it would have been if it wasn't as extreme as it was. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some problems, and there's still, lots of problems. But I don't know. I know some Jewish people that think it's hilarious, and they think like there's no harm, no foul for the most part. And I know there's others who are like angry at this because of how it portrays Judaism and Jews. So there's a lot to be said for sure.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that argument. Where shall we start? The beginning?
I think that's a great place to start. Let's start in the beginning.
Well, on December 25th, a long, long time ago, there was a boy born named Brian. And
No, it sets up, because this is a parody, particularly specifically about Jesus. So it sets up that there's this guy named Brian who was born a few houses down from Jesus, and we get a scene with the wise men coming to visit Brian, and then they realize, whoopsie, we're at the wrong house. We have to go see Jesus, and that's like one of the only time we see Jesus in the entire movie, apart from the Sermon on the Mount in the next scene. But it's like that's like where the joke starts. Like, okay, this is where we're at. We're reimagining Christianity if it was just some random dude, which I think is why a lot of Christians began getting upset at this, but there's a lot to be said.
for me, it really set up this idea of Brian's life playing out parallel to
Yeah,
Jesus's.
definitely.
Very good. And it was right away, I was like, okay, I get it. There's a guy named Brian. He's alive the same time as Jesus. What shenanigans shall ensue?
Yeah,
Was my mentality. Um,
definitely.
and then we get the credits, which I feel like pointing that out because I really like movies where the credits are at the beginning. So you have to sit and appreciate who took part in making this. You have
Thank
to sit there.
See, just like how I know you hate introductions to books and stuff like that, I'm surprised you're a fan of credits because I will sit through the entirety of credits because I think we need to watch the credits. But yeah, definitely films that start the whole segment with credits is great, and the fun song in the background, so good. My question though, that I didn't fully understand, are we presenting this as Brian being like a teenager? Is that was the vibe I got? That this is like teenage Brian, especially the way he reacts around his mother, and like the end of the song of the intro.
Like the credits were Teenage Brian,
Well,
or
I like the credits kind of like walk through to like get us up to present day to
yeah,
like where we see Brian, and it
yeah,
kind of ends with him being teenage Brian in the credits.
yeah.
Um,
I well, because when Jesus, how old was Jesus when he did the Sermon on the Mount? Because that's
like
where,
third, yeah, you're right. That would be put him in like 30,
yeah, because
33, some will say, but yeah,
if they're both born on the same day, and okay, so is the Sermon on the Mount thing that was gonna upset me with Connor is that like so it opens up with Jesus, and I was like, oh, that's the Sermon on the Mount,
mm.
and he looks at me, says, no, Brian isn't talking, he's the new Jesus, and I was like, that is, I don't think that's this movie. I don't I don't think that's what this movie is saying at all. So it was I was like, okay, recognizable story in the Bible, set
Mm.
us up. And then we yeah, you're right though. Brian is a little stunted. He acts like a teenager.
Yeah,
He's very willful. I don't know that interaction at the Sermon on the Mount, I'm not quite sure how to feel about it. Between Brian and his mom was fine, but then we get into the man hitting the woman
sure,
and the attempted rape part.
sure. Again, problematic movie.
Um, I don't know really what to say about that,
Yeah,
but that's what stood out to me from that
right. I
scene.
will say, moving on from that, I will say that I really enjoy the Sermon on the Mount scene from like a critical biblical studies perspective,
Yeah.
because like if we want to understand like historical Jesus, I think this section does a really good job at showing like, oh, when people wrote this down, they didn't really know what Jesus was saying. Like the idea that the Bible was written, decades after like Jesus actually spoke his words and did all his things by people who weren't there, that they got the words wrong. Like it's so hard for scholars to say confidently the words of Jesus or the words of the evangelists. It's very hard to nail that down for sure. And as Christians will look at the Bible and say, no, Jesus obviously said that. If we want to look at it from a historical critical perspective, it's much harder to do that. So to show that like people on the edges of the crowd are asking, what did he say? Blessed are the cheesemakers. I think that's a very poignant look at how biblical tradition may have progressed. Like obviously this is satire and expanding it a bit, but I thought that was notable.
No, it really is, especially now thinking about all the things that are happening in that scene. So for that to come across while
Mm.
they're also doing the more physical comedy,
Yeah,
uh that's a doozy. That's a lot happening at once.
yeah.
Because that is a deeper message.
Right. And I don't think that's what they were intending. I don't think that's what they were trying to do. I mean,
How do
well,
you know?
that's not to
How do you
say
know?
like that is almost the whole essence of the entire movie of looking at the fanaticism and uncritical look at how a religion is created. As we see in the second half of the movie, that seems to be kind of the whole critique of religion that this movie is presenting. But we see it in a little place, and I think unintentionally there.
And then they go to a stoning.
Yeah, as
And
one does. Your
women aren't
regular.
allowed.
Yeah, women aren't allowed. except it's exclusively women in beards. But all of the women in beards are played by men, which, like, on the one hand, is hilarious because like it's men pretending to be women to be men. I think that's a hilarious joke. But I think this also gets into the other problematic aspect of Monty Python, in which cross-dressing is presented as the butt of a joke instead of something seriously to be taken. And we see this later in later scenes that we'll talk about with Stan and Loretta. But how this movie addresses um, trans folks, I think is problematic in some senses, though others have taken it to be, somewhat progressive for its time. But we'll talk more about that when we get to Loretta.
It's also problematic, just like not hiring women.
Yeah, there's that
So,
too.
because I'm sure there are plenty of women that would have been down, but it was so funny the stoning scene. Just every time they said Jehovah, stones were thrown, and then
Yeah,
like the women's voices would like start up really high and then get low, and then go back down and then get low.
yeah. Hey, and this is what I mean by it being so satirical. Like, obviously, nothing like that ever happened. Like, that's just so, like, that's like not anything historical or any you know version of Judaism presents that. And I think it's because it makes so extreme things like that there that I don't think it's as bad as it could have been because it takes it too far, in that sense.
I also hate saying this, but you have to think about the context in which this was written and what the time period was like and what was acceptable and things such as that. We are removed from that
Sure.
now. So it's easy for people to look at it and say that was wrong, but it
Yeah,
wasn't wrong at
but
the time. That doesn't mean it's not wrong.
I think it was still wrong in that context. I think in that context, it was still aware. This was what, 79 it came out. So I think it was still in the zeitgeist of like understanding that this is wrong and pushing boundaries.
Well, I also think there's just still some people around today who probably watch it and they're like, this is genius.
Right,
This is the
right. There's that
truth.
too. The other thing I think is funny is Jehovah is not the name of God. Um, and I just thought that was funny. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, Jehovah takes the divine name, the consonants of the consonants of the divine name, and combines it with the vowels of Adonai, meaning my Lord, and that's how we get Jehovah. So the fact that even throughout it they weren't saying the divine name, I thought was a little silly.
I was fully ready for them to say it when they didn't actually say it. I was like, oh, okay. That's kind of respectful.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if that's what the intentions were, if that's just how it came out. A little respectful.
A little.
I'll I'll look at it that way. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
After the stoning, we have the Colosseum.
Yep, yep.
Dude, when that guy picked up the hand with the ring on it and was trying to get the ring off and then just decided to shove the entire arm into his jacket,
Mm.
I was cackling. I was like, that's funny.
Yeah, no, this film was filled with little one-offers, one-liners that you just have to pay attention to, and I think that's what's so good about this, the little small jokes like that. But our man Brian is a food salesman guy at the Coliseum, like
Concessions person.
there it is, that's the word, concessions person walking up and down the stairs at the Coliseum, where he stumbles across the People's Front of Judea,
The
or was it
Judean
the
People's Front.
the Judean People's Front? My bad. I'm so sorry. How dare I associate them with the People's Front of Judea?
How
Which,
dare!
oh, and I love this. This is like what the rest of the movie is about, and it shows the infighting between religious groups. Like, there's no one more upset than a Baptist is at a Catholic. And so like the amount of like infighting that's in religious groups that like outsiders are like, what in the world is going on? I think they did really good at showing this through the Judeans People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea.
I actually don't know which one it was.
I was it the PFJ or the JP? And I think that's the humor of it because as outsiders looking in on it, like we can't even remember what the whole squabble is between their names. But here we meet Stan, who says, "Actually, I want to go by Loretta," and we get this back and forth between the four of them about silliness, talking about how Stan wants to become trans, wants to be Loretta, which and this is where it gets controversial for some here. I think they handled it well, especially for its time. I'm not too upset about it. Again, I know very very little about queer studies, but the fact that throughout the movie they referred to her as Loretta, like they came to accept it, I thought was very telling, and I think was meant to be part of a joke. They're kind of poking fun at it still, but I think they handled it surprisingly well, or at least it's changed its interpretation to where it is now, where now it can be seen as being well done.
It aged well.
Yeah.
It aged well. Like it's like respect a pronoun, respect a name. Like
Mhm.
just do that. And they did it. And I was like, yeah, I love Loretta. Stan Loretta was played by Eric Idle. And I didn't know this till I looked up his IMDb, but he has voiced some of my favorite animated characters, including one of the dragons from Quest for Camelot. So it was,
Quest for Camelot.
oh, I need to show you that. It's so good. It's not religious, it's just really good.
Sure.
Um, but yes, I was shocked. I was like, wow, I actually know one of the people in Monty Python. And then I was told I should know John Cleese. And I said,
Yeah, you definitely should.
ooh, no offense to that man. I do not know who he is. Um, but no, I honestly, the first time I heard it, I was like, about the trans conversation. And then the second time I watched it, I was like, you know what? This is not the worst it could be.
Yeah.
It it could be so terrible. And then throughout the movie, just the little recognitions, it was good. Two thumbs up. But they kind of try to recruit, or do they recruit Brian, or is Brian reaching out to them?
Brian's reaching out to them because we learn that his father was a Roman soldier,
They're so
and he's like getting fed up with the Roman occupation.
yeah, he
So
wants to rebel.
yeah, so he says, "How can I join? I want to be part of your group." And he obviously didn't care if it was the People's Front of Judea or the Judean People's Front, but he's like, "I want to join y'all. Let's be friends." And their hazing ritual is for him to graffiti all over a wall. Um, Romans go home, except in Latin. And the first time I watched this movie was when I was taking a Hebrew class, and I was like learning these conjugations in Hebrew, not in Latin. And like that just hit home. Like that, this is my favorite scene in the movie where the Roman soldier is teaching the guy or is teaching Brian how to conjugate uh, Romans go home correctly. I think it's hilarious. I think that's very much how I felt learning Hebrew. So my favorite scene in the entire movie right there.
It was funny. Um, no, the sheer look of terror on Brian's face when the soldiers trying to explain everything. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just like this is like my worst nightmare to feel threatened by conjugation. Like, absolutely not. But he did it.
Yeah.
He got the graffiti up. And so he got to join the People's Movement of Judea, the Judean People's Movement. Who knows?
People, he got to join the group.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we go back home at their base, their wherever they meet up, and we get into this great debate about what have the Romans ever done for us, and we find out, oh, they've given us medicine and the aqueducts and all of those things. Again, I think they made an unintentional but oddly somewhat correct exploration here, because there's some like rabbinic literature from like after this time, but like still quite old, where they are also kind of asking that question of, oh, actually the Romans have given us aqueducts and roads and all these things, and it's opposed by this other person like, but no, the Romans have oppressed us and they're bad. So again, I don't think this was an intentional choice by them, but there are some ancient rabbinical sources that show this conversation of, are the Romans that bad? And then they finally come to the conclusion that yes, the Romans are bad. We need to go storm Pilot's house and kidnap his wife.
Wow. So they didn't mean to, but they did.
Yeah,
Like prefer well, and I was
happy
thinking
accidents.
it was impressive how we could reflect that onto modern day.
Right.
Because it's like these oppressive powers have given us this technology, this ability, this access to do things. They're still
Yeah.
oppressing us.
No, it's definitely a satire looking at modern times. And, 45, 50 years after that this was made, yeah, it still applies for sure.
Yep. So they make the plan to go into pilots. And
Mm.
obviously Reg, who's leading this entire thing, can't do it because he has back problems.
Right, right.
And that makes so much sense. No, it's just like a rebel leader to not actually be involved. It's ridiculous.
um, yeah. And then they encounter the other group in the sewers with them, both trying to I just I think they're so creative in the jokes that they make. Like I would never in a million of years think, oh, we'll add a secondary rebel group to invade at the same time. I think that's just so funny. They did so good, and then they fight each other. At one point, Brian says, "Remember our true enemy," and it's the third Jewish group that they all say that the People's Front for Judea. Everyone's like, and Brian says, no, the Romans. And they're like, oh, yeah. But they continue fighting each other until they kill all of them except for Brian. He's just standing there. So good.
It's almost like commentary on how infighting gets you nowhere.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's commenting on that. And it's also, showing the historical situation happening where there were these Jewish rebel groups popping up that were very, very frequently squelched by the Romans and didn't get anywhere really until 70 CE when we get the destruction of the temple and the big Jewish uprising happened. But here we are.
So they're eventually all, are they all captured by the Romans or is it just Brian?
It's just Brian. They killed each other.
Oh,
Poor guys.
so sad.
Yeah.
But
But
Brian's
they get
captured.
Brian's captured and they get brought up to Pilate. And I think this is the most famous part of the movie. When people think of this movie, I think they often think of this scene, which is where we meet Pilate, who has a speech impediment, which again problematic, but here we are, and we're introduced to his friend Bigus Dickus, which gets the entire all of his guards laughing. It's a funny joke. They're making a dick joke. It's silly using Roman language and speech impediments.
Listen, I'm just gonna say I laughed harder at this movie when I had a man next to me that I felt I needed to impress by understanding the jokes.
Sure,
And
sure.
that is my
No,
plight as a woman. But the biggest dickest thing was was really funny.
right. And I think that's a good point. I think this movie is very much directed towards men. I think this is a men's humor movie, and I acknowledge that. I'm the one that made you watch this.
Yep,
I'm part of the problem.
it's fine.
It's fine. Thank you. Thank you for
It,
saying that me being part of the problem is okay. I appreciate that.
it's fine. Everyone's part of some problem.
Amen.
Um, but no, that was it was just a stupid scene. It was
Yeah.
just I'm really not sure what point, if there was any point. I
There
don't think
doesn't,
so.
I don't think there has to be a point. I think they just said this can be really silly.
Okay, well, I guess.
um, which I think in the context of not making any sense and not having a really good point moves in well to the next scene, which is when Brian is escaping and he falls into an alien spaceship and he goes onto a space fight for 3 minutes of the movie, and then they crash and the chase continues. My least favorite part of the movie, but still quite silly.
Your least favorite part? My favorite part. I'm like, finally, some action. Let's get in here. Let's really like twist the top off this thing.
Sure, it felt a little too detached for me, but I still think it was great.
It was like a recalibration for my brain. And my brain was like, see, don't take this movie so seriously. Don't get
Definitely.
offended. Don't take
Yeah.
it so serious. So the chase ensues.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I feel like that kind of sets the the ends the first half of the movie and we can kind of start the second half. Because at this point we kind of get into like Brian as Jesus, where Brian takes on this religious leader platform because he runs back to their hideaway place and he falls out of their window onto a preacher man, a prophet, if you will. And in hiding from the Romans, he has to take up that role and start teaching things. And he teaches like generally nice things, like good platitudes, like, hey, I don't remember what he says, but it's like, be nice to people, consider the lily. And I think this is where like I really start to enjoy the movie because this is where it has a lot of commentary on on religion, especially. And I think what they did really well is presenting Brian as giving as being reluctant to present information. And I think being reluctant to give that information is what drew everyone in. Like, whoa, you don't want to share that with me? I want to know. I want to follow you. Ooh, you have a gourd and you're not going to explain what the gourd is doing? It must be a special sign. And then as he runs away, he loses his sandal, and that must be a sign. And I think this is where it gets really good about religious commentary.
It really does because almost immediately he has two different factions happening.
Yeah.
Almost immediately as this religion is created, there are already two opposing views of what the religion is, what it's based on, what the sign was.
Mhm.
It was crazy how quickly it all turned.
Yeah, it turns so fast into like this mob attacking, running after Brian, wanting to, follow him as their messiah. And it goes from half the crowd thinking, oh, this gourd is a sign, the other half of the crowd, oh, the shoe is the sign. And then once they figure out the shoe is the sign for some reason, they say, well, does that mean we should also take off one of our shoes? Or is the shoe another sign? And I think this required interpretation of the events happening, just as we modern times must give interpretation to the biblical text that has been received. I think is very important to look at and look at the how much we just accept things in religion without any critical thought, which I think sometimes can be good and helpful for people, but also should be acknowledged that you're doing it. Like if you're going to be accepting things uncritically, which we all do in all aspects of our life, but we should be aware of it. And I think that is what this scene is really poking at, and it does it very well.
Yeah. I really, really felt for the old man though, that had been keeping his vow of silence. And
Yeah.
then him telling these people that are following Brian, him telling them he fell on my foot and then I spoke for the first time in this many years, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, yay, look at the miracles he's doing." And
Mm.
this poor old man's like, "No, I'm battered. Like,
Yeah.
see me break my vow of silence." And then Brian offers up his bush of berries.
Right. And I think this is poking at like the religiously devout, the extremely devout, because he's taken a vow of silence for 18 years. And, Brian stumbles into him, causing him to break that silence. And he kind of goes mad in that. And it kind of shows the how out of touch people can be with people around them if they've been so involved in their own hole that they've dug themselves. And I think that is an interesting aspect that they chose, and they did it well. We're at the point where I have less critiques and more like, oh, that's an interesting way to do that. Um, so yeah, this is the good part of the movie.
So I'm trying to remember where they go after that. So
after
after the
this,
hole,
after this, there's the like singular woman actor that they have. I forget her name, which is part of the problem of this movie. But
back
she's
to
like, oh my
Matthew.
goodness. she's like, says, "Oh my goodness, Brian, you're so good. You're doing great, Brian." And she's like, "Let's go back to your place." And Brian says, "Of course, let's go back to my place and have, um, good sexy time." And Brian's excited about that. They have fun. They do their thing. They wake up in the morning. Brian gets ready. He, stretches, uh, unclothed, and he opens up his window to a gigantic crowd of people like waiting for Brian's word so that they can worship and praise him. And everything that Brian says, like, it's a blessing, it's a message. It's again showing the religious fanaticism that for some reason started here with Brian.
Yeah, and again, it parallel to Jesus's life because, after the Sermon on the Mount, I would say, like, did Jesus grow in popularity? Like,
Right. Yeah. So, like as we've mentioned in other episodes, like the idea of Jesus being as popular as he was is very much exaggerated in our modern mindset. Um, the statistic I always go back to that's stuck in my head because I've been told it from various professors. It's like by the end of the first century, there were 10,000 Christians max. So by the time Jesus being around, 30, 35 CE, not that many Christians around or not that many followers of Jesus around. It's a very small group with, you know, small things happening, which we saw in the Sermon on the Mount scene. Like it wasn't a huge crowd. They were in the back and there were like people there, but it wasn't a huge crowd. So definitely, definitely that happening there.
yeah. And yeah, no, that just for him to go from having fun times with Judith to
Judith.
yes, to there being the big crowd, and then his mom being like, "No, you can't talk to him." No, what do you mean?
But then also at the same time, really enjoying the fame that she's getting for a second
Yeah,
there.
yeah. No, I enjoyed the mom a
Yeah.
lot.
And
And then
then
the soldiers come looking for him.
yeah, well, before that, very
Oh,
briefly,
mhm.
I love the message that Brian gives them that you've got to think for yourself. You're all individuals. And in this entire scene, no one like speaks individually. The entire scene is just the entire mob speaking full coherent sentences all together. Again, great joke, very silly, but they all respond with, "Yes, we've all got to think for ourselves. We're all individuals." Again, it's a very interesting critique of religion happening there. But yeah, the Romans capture Brian.
Poor Brian. Is that then when we get to I have a very specific scene I want to talk about, but I don't know if we're there yet. The one where they're putting people through to go to the crucifixion and he's giving them directions.
Yeah, we're almost there. I
We're
think.
almost there. Okay.
I before we have that, we have Judith going to the people's front of Judea,
Yeah.
and we have this very Kafka-esque scene where which is a very very poignant critique of the political left that say, "Oh, we have to go through all of our documents first. We have to prove this, say yes. We have to think about this. And it's very important that we take immediate action to make decisions, and they don't ever like do anything. They're just talking about it." I think that was a very very good critique of the political left that they had there.
Well,
Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, after that, we get um, Pilate, and then Biggest Dickus has arrived, and this is making fun of the Barabbas scene in the Gospels, where uh, Pilate says, "Okay, we'll release one prisoner," and all of the crowd are making fun of him, saying names that they don't have, so that they can hear his lisp. And during that, I think is when we get to the scene where they're walking through looking for the crosses.
Yeah, no, this guy's directing everyone to their crucifix. He's like, here for the crucifixion, straight down the hall. And I'm like, oh my God. Because they the idea of like leading people to their death, like it's thinking about like firing squads or the
Mhm.
crucifixion, like they probably had a process. And so
Sure.
that was something that came into my head. But also then Eric Idle, he plays someone who's getting crucified, and he comes in, he's like, I'm just joking. I know I'm not actually here for the crucifixion. I'm just kidding. I am. I
No,
don't know why. That was so funny to me.
The lightness that they put with the crucifixion scene, the entire thing, is just so contrary to any other movie about Jesus and this scene. When you get to the crucifixion scene with any movie about Jesus, that's where it really gets serious. It's like, oh my goodness, this is the most important aspect. But and we even see that saw that in Jesus Christ Superstar. Like even though they're dancing and having a good time in Jesus Christ Superstar, it's still the pinnacle of the movie. It's still the most serious, most you know bloody aspect of the movie. But here, they're all laughing and joking and having a good time. It's so contrary to what you'd expect, which is what makes it funny and silly and controversial to Christians.
Yeah. Because they finally decide on someone to pardon, and they decide on Brian, biggest
Yeah.
dickus, and Pilate. And then they go to where Brian and all the other men are crucified, and they say, "Oh, we're here to release Brian." And Eric Idle's character, who was joking, is like, "Oh, I'm Brian." And there's
Mhm.
poor Brian up on the crucifix, and he's like, "No, it's not. No, I'm Brian. I'm Brian. Let me down." And then the guy's being let down. He's like, "I was just kidding. I'm not Brian." And he's getting hauled off. And so you're like, "Oh my gosh, where's Brian's help?" And then the People's Front for Judea comes and says, I forget what they say, but they kill themselves.
Right. The other
So,
the we haven't met these people yet. These are the other group that we don't like.
like, I and then Judith comes running up. "Brian, I heard what you're doing for us. Thank you." I'm like, "Untie him.
Yeah, it's
Let him down."
they're so excited. Like, oh my goodness, thank you for being our martyr. And the entire time Brian is like, I don't want to be your martyr. I'm not a Messiah. Get me off of here. Which again, poking fun at religion, saying like, why not? Like they're obviously presenting a very different scene than what would have happened, but they're presenting a scene that is very humorous and like, oh well, just we can just take him down. Like this is like for the one guy, like this is a regular Saturday afternoon, and he gets taken off every week. But the willingness and desire for them to want a martyr for their cause, I think is also we see that very commonly even in religion today. Like they want something to be martyred in order to give their cause extra significance, for sure.
I just thought of a scene we didn't talk about when he's in jail with the guy who's hung up on the wall,
Oh yeah.
and the guy on the wall keeps saying, "You're so lucky. They
Mhm.
spat at you. You're so lucky." And to me, I was like, "Oh, that's a guy who is like pandering to the authoritarian regime that oppresses them.
Mhm.
That's sick." But the way they presented it was so funny because it's this man hanging on a wall. It's like they spat on you. Oh my God, you're so lucky. I wish it was you. I wish they would
Yeah.
spit on me. I'm like, "Oh, bro, calm down." Um, Sorry,
No,
ADHD.
the competing of suffering, by that guy, very very silly.
Yeah.
But we end with a nice little song. We got everyone on the crosses, all everyone getting crucified together, singing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life," which is so good.
Ways to go on the bright side of life.
um, but yeah, and that ends it. And I think I don't know, despite all of the problematic aspects, um the stereotyping of Jewish people, the use of slurs, the transphobia, and the making fun of cross dressing, and the upsetting Christians, and all the other things, and the blackface of the one of the wise men. Very problematic movie. Should not be overlooked. That should be definitely considered when watching this. And if you don't look at this movie and say, "Ooh, that's a little off," then I don't think you're looking at this movie right. But at the same time, I think they do a lot of things well, and they create interesting things to think about in an entertaining way. And that doesn't negate all the problematic aspects of this film, but it does require us to consider them.
Yeah. It's up to us to use discernment when viewing art.
Sure, yeah,
And what we should be taking from it, and what we should be learning from.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, one final question.
Sure.
Is this a religious movie or does this movie just depict religion?
Yeah, I'd almost say neither. It's it's certainly not a religious movie. Uh, but in the aspect that it depicts religion, it's depicting it in a farcical, outlandish way that isn't religion. Like in its depiction of religion, it's by no means depicting religion. But for sure, it's depicting religion much more than it is being religious.
Yeah. I feel comfortable saying depicting religion because I think it's depicting one, maybe group's view of
Mhm.
how they view religion.
Sure, sure.
I think it is a depiction of religion from one very specific lens.
Yeah.
And it's a harsh depiction,
Mm.
but I think through that harsh depiction, you can kind of maybe look at things a little differently and maybe try to see, like, okay, well, what makes some people think of
Yeah.
it this way? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it's very clearly a satirical comedy. And the thing that makes it a good satirical comedy is because it does allow this moment of reflection and thinking about how it depicts religion and society. And I think it does that well.
Yep. I can't say it was my favorite of the movies we
Sure.
watched because we've watched
Valid.
some bangers, man. But we had to get Monty Python in at some point. And I don't know if they have any other movies that will be featured. Are there any other movies that would qualify? Did they do any other religious movies?
I mean, like you can make the argument for any movie to be religious, but they famously have um, the Holy Grail, which is about the search for the holy relic. Which like there's not too many aspects of the movie that are exclusively religious, and I've never seen their Meaning of Life film either. But if we do return to Monty Python, I'm sure it'll be quite a while, unless you guys comment and want to hear our thoughts on it. So put it in the comments whether you want to hear more about Monty Python or if there are other films you want us to hear to talk about.
Yeah, and if you're looking for places to reach out to us, we are available to talk to you on Twitter, X, no, those are the same thing. Bluesky, Facebook, TikTok, there it is, Instagram. We have the podcast episodes on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music. Send us an email, theriligioustreehouse@gmail.com. Comment, like, thoughts, comments, concerns, all of these things we would love to hear.
Oh yeah.
We've hoped you've enjoyed your time here at the Religious Treehouse, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye all.